everyone, and welcome to the 6th Annual Stephen H. Schneider Memorial Lecture in this new, beautiful auditorium. This year's lecture is organized by Students for a Sustainable Stanford and co-sponsored by the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment,
Stanford Haas Center for Public Service,
the Stanford Precourt Institute for Energy,
the Sustainable Energy Initiative at the Graduate School of Business,
the Stanford Speakers Bureau,
the Tomcat Center for Sustainable Energy,
the Stanford Energy Club,
the Stanford Latinx Business Association,
the Stanford Society of Latino Engineers,
Hermanas de Stanford,
the Stanford Society of Women Engineers,
and Stanford Women in Business.
We are your hosts for tonight. I'm Maeve Gibbons.
And I'm Kira Smiley. And in the audience is our third co-organizer, Elena Press. A quick few logistical items before we get started. Please silence your cell phones, and in addition, throughout the lecture, feel free to tweet your questions, adding the hashtag on the screen, hashtag Schneider2018 to your tweet, so you can add into the conversation through tweeting in your questions. Then, we will be using your questions in real time through our moderated question and answer session following the lecture.
This lecture is in honor of the esteemed Stanford climate scientist, Dr. Stephen H. Schneider. Dr. Schneider was at the forefront of climate science and communication, pioneering research efforts and conveying complex science to the public. Dr. Schneider was a leading advocate for sharply reducing greenhouse gas emissions and served as a consultant for each president, from President Richard Nixon to President Barack Obama. Dr. Schneider dedicated his life to his students and the world around him.
Joining us tonight, all the way from Florida, is Dr. Schneider's widow, the incredible Dr. Terry Root. At this time, we would like to extend a special thank you to Dr. Root for her guidance and support in organizing this lecture. She's been instrumental to the process every year and is a great inspiration to us. Thanks, Terry.
So now we would like to begin our program with a video honoring Dr. Schneider's life and work. Thank you.
How did we know in the 1970s pretty much what would happen? It was theory then. And since then, nature's been cooperating with theory, but we kind of knew what was going to happen. You couldn't add 4 watts of energy over every square meter and have nothing happen.
The scientific consensus that CO2 will build up and will be a potential problem is very large, but a scientific consensus on precisely how influential it will be in 10 years or 20 years, what areas climates will get better, what areas will get worse, this is where the controversy comes in.
We also knew that you had to stop using the atmosphere as an unpriced sewer to dump your smokestack and tailpipe waste and your land use change interactions. All of that was known. It was not just in the club of 100 left-brain people. We testified to Congress, we talked to ministers, there were national and international meetings. It was out there. Why didn't we succeed? What happened? Climate science is a system science. It's like trying to understand your body or trying to figure out something with cancer, or how is the educational system going to work most effectively, and how are we going to do security. Every one of these complex systems problems has multiple components. And when you break them down, what you find out is rarely do we know everything, and rarely do we know nothing. So we have to break system science into the well-established components, which are settled. I'll tell you a few. Into competing explanations where our work has been able to get us to winnow it down to 2 or 3 possibilities. Here's where the disconnect comes along. Special interests will grab what's convenient for their ideology or their position. So what you end up with is you end up with a cacophony, typically, of people selecting stuff out of context, and then you end up with the end of the world versus good for you. Now, I'll confess my prejudice. The end of the world and good for you are the 2 lowest probability outcomes. What we are looking at is a multiple range of potential outcomes, and what systems scientists do is they winnow out the relative likelihood of these multiple outcomes. So if you try to cover it as a yes or no, and you go out there and you take a 200 scientist report like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it goes through 3 years of writing, 2 rounds of reviews, 1,000 review comments on every chapter, and then 2 petroleum geologists, who are special interests in finding oil, paid by which oil company because they have PhDs and given equal status in a story or on television. You see, we get a little mad about that, and we call that utter distortion, and they say, oh no, that's balance. It is not balance, it is utter distortion, because they are not reporting the relative credibility of the multiple positions, and it means that you're leaving it up to the public and the political world to figure that out for themselves. They're capable of it, but they rarely do it. How many people in this place, in the fire-prone California, have had a house fire? A few of you. Typically, it's 1% to 2%. How many of you have fire insurance? We already are very risk averse when we have consequences that matter. We do not need 95% certainty. Here is where, again, people frame this problem by looking for exceptions to the conventional wisdom and claim until the exceptions are resolved, it isn't proved and it's premature to act. Yet we're acting on a 1% risk and paying insurance. And here we're talking about 50% risks to the planetary life support system, and they're telling us that's not certain enough. Let's talk about tipping points. So what about Greenland? How could Greenland be a tipping point? Right now it's melting at an unprecedented rate. The water is rolling down. Nobody knows if the water is freezing on the way down or reaching the bottom. If the water makes it all the way to the bottom, then it's going to heat the bottom and lubricate it. Once you start melting it, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where you could move toward 5 meters of sea level rise and there'd be no way to stop it. What we don't know is, does it need 1 more degree before that happens, 2 or 3? All I can say with high degree of confidence is the more we keep adding unprecedented levels of warming to the system, the more the number of tipping points that are going to be crossed. We know for sure they're there. We don't know for sure where they are. This is not just an academic exercise. This is something we've got to have people deeply engaged in, because we're talking about the sustainability for their children, the grandchildren, and the rest of nature, our behavior. What's the worst thing about tipping points like Greenland? We will probably not know when we've crossed it for 50 years. So our behavior in the next generation could precondition a sustainability issue for a millennium or 10 based upon the convenience of one species for one generation. I find that a very morally daunting prospect.
So what we're really doing is we're insulting our global environment at a faster rate than we're understanding it. And the best we can do, in all honesty, is say, look out, there's a chance of potentially irreversible change at a global scale based upon the benefits of use of energy, and it's very tough for us to know whether those benefits of energy today are worth the potential risks of environmental change.
And we have got to take back the airwaves in a way and make certain that what's out there is more credible, not just simply following some formulaic balance. Thanks very much.
We are so happy that you're joining us here tonight. Because of scientists like Dr. Schneider, we have access to a wealth of knowledge and tools to understand and address climate change. Leveraging this research and emerging technologies is key to tackling global warming. Nowhere is translating climate scientists more important than within the energy industry. It is our pleasure to be able to introduce you to our guest speaker for the night, Geisha Williams.
Ms. Williams is the CEO and president of PG&E Corporation, the parent company of California's largest gas and electric provider. She joined the company in 2007 after working as the Vice President of Power Systems, Electric Distribution at Florida Power and Light Company, FPL, and has more than 3 decades of experience in the energy industry. Under her leadership, PG&E was named the greenest energy company in the nation in Newsweek's annual Green Rankings. The company recently announced that they had reached their renewable energy sustainability goals 3 years early and now deliver nearly 80% of their electricity from greenhouse gas-free sources. During her tenure at PG&E, Ms. Williams has been instrumental in bringing together a coalition of environmental, labor, and business groups to work together to forge landmark agreements.
Ms. Williams earned her bachelor's degree in engineering from the University of Miami. She also holds a master's degree in business administration from Nova Southeastern University. Beyond her work in energy, Geisha Williams is the first woman to be CEO of PG&E and is the first Latina CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She was recently named number 19 on Fortune magazine's list of most powerful women.
Ms. Williams has also chosen to donate her speaker's honorarium to the North Bay Fire Relief Fund. We are delighted to have her with us tonight. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Geisha Williams.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here to have an opportunity to speak with all of you. I want to thank the students for Sustainable Stanford for inviting me, as well as the sponsors that Kira mentioned earlier. It never really ceases to amaze me how lucky we are here in the Bay Area, how lucky I am to run a company like PG&E and have this world-class institution like Stanford right in our backyard. This incredible global hub of technology and innovation. So much of the change that we're seeing in clean energy space has actually been driven right here in Silicon Valley. And for us at PG&E, this has opened the door for dozens of innovative partnerships and projects. It puts us truly in a unique position within our industry. And I would tell you, we are the envy of the industry. We know that to deal with challenges like climate change, it's going to require us to think really differently. So in fact, for the past several years, PG&E has been working with the Stanford Business School to help build a new leadership development program for our people with a focus on innovation and creative approaches like design thinking. So far, the classes have been great. They've been going out to our senior directors and our directors, and they all come back energized and inspired by the experience that they get here. So my hope is that I can give a little bit of that back to you all and that you walk out of here with a little bit of energy and inspiration for the future as well. I also want to say how truly special it is for me to speak at an event named in honor of Dr. Stephen Schneider. Not many people know this, but back in 2006, PG&E CEO at the time did something very unusual, probably unprecedented. He reached out to a small handful of the country's top climate scientists, and he invited them to come to PG&E. At the time, very few companies, including PG&E, had any kind of formal public stance on climate change. I think we called it global warming back then. Frankly, most companies were content to avoid the issue altogether. Maybe it was an issue for future generations. It was really like that Al Gore book, remember? What was it, Inconvenient Truth? I think there was an awful lot of truth in that. But at PG&E, over a period of several months, Steve and a group of other experts sat down with our senior team. They went deep on the science, as you could see from that video. They discussed what we knew, what we believed, what we didn't know. They answered questions, lots of questions, and they talked about what it meant to respond to this challenge and the implications of not doing so. It was those conversations that led PG&E in 2006 to step forward and take a stand and say, climate change is real and the need for action is now. That was a big moment for us. Now, it may seem like a tiny step as we look back, but 12 years ago, that was big. It was a giant leap for an energy company to actually take that position. Dr. Steve Schneider helped PG&E make that leap. We were the first company in our industry and one of the first companies in any industry to put that stake in the ground and to make a formal commitment to action. And that step helped lead to a sea change in the conversation in the business community. The question went from whether or not climate change was real to how are we going to meet that challenge? What are we going to do about it? And we at PG&E, we went all in. PG&E came out and became the first investor-owned utility to publicly support Governor Schwarzenegger's landmark Global Warming Solutions Act, also known as AB 32, the first program in the country to take a comprehensive long-term approach to addressing climate change. We became a founding member of a group of companies called the U.S. Climate Action Partnership to advocate for federal action on greenhouse gas reduction. And we've even been active in the global level as well. We joined Governor Brown a couple years ago in Paris for the Paris Agreement. We believed it then, and we believe in it now. Now, I know that Dr. Terry Root is here in the audience today, and I had an opportunity to meet with her ahead of time. But Terry, I never had a chance to meet Stephen personally, but I do know he made a profound difference at PG&E by encouraging us and challenging us to lead on this issue. It made a difference. And I have to tell you, I didn't know it at the time, but it actually made a difference in my decision to come to PG&E 10 years ago. 10 years ago, one of the things that actually made me take the leap and come out to California and work for a company like PG&E was its position on climate change, because I was all in Florida back then as well. I think Steve would be proud and pleased of the way that we've taken up his challenge. I think he'd be thrilled to see how far California has come. But I would also tell you, I'm sure he'd be the first one to tell all of us in this room and anywhere else he had an opportunity to do so, that there is so much work that's left for us to really engage in. I like to joke with people that I got my first climate change sort of lesson early in my life. I was born in Cuba. I came to this country when I was 5 years old, and my parents were political dissidents. And somehow, again, it's a long story, but we ended up in Minnesota. And so we went from the sunny subtropics of Cuba to the frozen tundra of winter in Minnesota almost overnight. So maybe it wasn't climate change, maybe it was climate shock, but I will never forget that. Nowadays, though, we don't have to travel far to experience the effects of climate change. We are living it. Climate change is here. It's not something for future generations to deal with. It is something that we know we are dealing with as we speak. We're seeing it here in California. Not to mention, they saw it in Houston. I think it's absolutely prevalent in the Caribbean, in the Virgin Islands, Florida, Alaska, and scores of other places where we're seeing the impacts of climate change and the severity of the weather like we've not seen before. It isn't normal. But more and more, we're hearing people referring to it as the new normal. The question is, if this is the new normal for our climate, what kind of new normal do we need in terms of climate actions to be able to sustain the type of future that we know we all want and desire? How do we transform our energy sector over the next few decades to create a low-carbon economy? How do we achieve the bold climate and clean energy goals that we've set here in California? Now, California's goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are the most progressive anywhere in North America, and I'm proud of that. The near-term target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020. It's actually within striking distance, thanks to the incredible progress that we've made over the past 15 years or so. But it's easy to forget just how significant this progress has been. So let me give you some numbers from PG&E that might put it in perspective. So back in 2003, we delivered about 11% renewable energy to our customers. And that was really from small hydro, some solar, and some wind. Today, we've tripled that. We're at 33%. And it's not even including our large hydro facilities. And it's 33%, and that's a 4. That's not our ceiling. When you include our hydro operations and our nuclear power plants, the numbers are even more amazing. Almost 80% of the energy that we deliver to our customers come from sources that emit 0 greenhouse gases. Here's another proof point. Let's look at the growth in private rooftop solar, which, by the way, we fully support. In the early 2000s, the number of private rooftop solar customers in PG&E service area was in the hundreds. Today, we've helped connect more than 340,000 customers to our grid with a solar installation. 1 out of every 5 customers in the United States that have a solar installation are in our service area. That's more than any other energy provider in the country. In terms of overall solar capacity, California now has more than the next 9 states combined. That's amazing, and it's just the beginning. Similar with electric vehicles. 1 out of every 5 electric vehicles in the US plugs into our system. And we achieve this while simultaneously improving the reliability of the electric system. In recent years, we've had the best electric reliability in our history, largely because we've invested in making the electric grid smarter, more dynamic, more resilient, and more flexible. And we've done it all while keeping rates mostly in line with inflation and while continuing to help the state grow its economy. In fact, California's economy has continued to create jobs and grow at one of the fastest rates in the country. 15 years ago, no one could have predicted that this was possible in such a relatively short period of time. So as a result, as I said, it looks really good for us as a state and our ability to cut those emissions goals to 1990 levels by the year 2020. So we're on the right path. However, by 2030, the goal goes up significantly. The goal by 2030 is to be another 40% below that. So we're talking about cutting emissions nearly in half, not quite, for the 6th largest economy in the world in about 12 years. Now, as quickly as we've made progress in the past 15 years or so, in order to go to that next level of reducing emissions by another 40%, we're going to have to cut emissions at a rate 7 times faster in the coming decade. That's a challenge, but we can do it. To do it, we need to hit at least 50% renewables, probably more. We'll need to double energy efficiency in our buildings. And we'll have to have at least 5 million electric vehicles on our roads statewide compared to the roughly 350,000 that we have today. All of this over a period of time when the state expects to add another 5 million people to its population. I think it's important to take stock of that and acknowledge it is significant. It's going to really be difficult. We're not talking about incremental change or going after low-hanging fruit. We're talking about the hard stuff. We're talking about transformative change. So it might seem strange what I'm going to suggest next. What would you say if I told you that one of the biggest keys to enabling this low-carbon economy isn't a new 21st century innovation? Rather, I truly believe that it's a machine that the National Academy of Engineering called the most important achievement of the 20th century, the electric power grid. I love the electric power grid. Or to be more accurate, the modern, digitized, smarter version of the grid that we're in the process of building today. Let me explain why I believe this is so important. As I mentioned in my opening comments, we're seeing an amazing amount of innovation and clean energy technology. I already mentioned the growth in rooftop solar, which is becoming increasingly efficient and affordable. Same thing with electric vehicles. The prices are really beginning to come down, almost half in the last few years. We're also seeing tremendous growth in the capabilities of battery storage, with the technology becoming cheaper, more efficient, more powerful. And of course, we're seeing a huge number of smart devices that people can take advantage of in their homes and in their businesses. We're even seeing so-called virtual assets instead of physical devices. These are things like demand management and demand response, where an energy user can offer to reduce their demand under certain conditions for getting paid for it. The point is, we don't lack for clean energy technologies. What we need desperately is the ability to integrate them, optimize them, scale them in a way that's equal to the task at hand. That's the key. And the platform for that integration and the key to creating that energy network of tomorrow is the electric grid. A great analogy that I often like to talk about is very much the laptop or the iPhone. Your smartphones, your laptops are an awesome piece of technology by themselves, powerful, truly powerful. They're supercomputers, right, in your pocket or on your desk. But they're exponentially more valuable when connected to the network of the internet because of how much more you can do with them. Some of you, I'm sure, remember the company Sun Microsystems, started by 3 Stanford graduates. In fact, the name Sun stood for Stanford University Network. A lot of people don't know that. Their tagline was, "The network is the computer." It meant that the real power was in the network, in the integration and connectivity. And of course, they were absolutely right. The same is true for energy technologies. A solar panel or a battery is great by itself, but their real potential is maximized only when they're networked and integrated through the grid. The energy network of tomorrow is about tying all of these different resources together and optimizing them. It's about allowing power to flow in multiple directions from multiple sources rather than one direction from a big generator far away. It's about enabling these technologies to talk to one another and to work in concert as part of a complex system. And the platform for all of that is the modern grid. Now, the advantage of the grid, well, it provides essential universal connectivity, including the ability to exchange power back and forth among batteries, electric vehicles, solar panels, and other resources. It provides scale, which is critical when you're trying to solve an issue like climate change. And it provides stability, which is foundational in an age where we have a digital economy where we rely on reliable power 24/7. The modern grid has the ability to change the way we access and use energy in the same way that the web or the cloud has changed the way that we access or use data or information. Now, each year, a group called GridWise Alliance ranks the 50 states on their progress on grid modernization. And you won't be surprised to hear that California leads the way in this particular area, a very important area. We've invested billions of dollars with smart meters, intelligent switches and sensors, data analytics capabilities, and so on. And it's paid off. It's paid off in our ability to integrate unprecedented levels of renewables, continued energy efficiency progress, and more choice and control for customers while at the same time improving reliability. Now, we need to take that integration to a whole new level. So let me give you a couple of examples of what that might look like. One is taking place right here in Silicon Valley. PG&E is working with General Electric and Tesla, along with a few other companies, to test something that we call the Distributed Energy Resource Management System, or DERMS. We have an acronym for everything. The pilot combines private residential rooftop solar with smart inverters, residential battery storage, commercial industrial battery storage, and a large utility-scale storage facility. It basically is testing the software that coordinates and optimizes the use of these resources together. It's the first time we've pulled all of these technologies into a single operational system. It's about solving the challenge of having visibility into all of these resources that our customers are connecting to the grid, even when we don't own those resources. It's important for our understanding of how we can manage to ensure all these resources are working optimally, safely, reliably, and in a resilient way for our system. It is very cool, and I'm telling you, that's the shape of the future. Here's another example. In Oakland, there is a 40-year-old stinker of a power plant. It's nasty. It's fueled with jet fuel. I won't say anything else. It's owned by a company called Dynegy, and it only runs part of the time on something that's called, a reliability sort of must-run contract. So it's only used when there are really high levels of usage on the system, and it's sort of required in a pinch, if you will. But today, we can do it differently. We've proposed an innovative plan that would be cheaper and cleaner than either of these options. The options that we have today for replacing a plant like that are to replace it with another power plant or run really extensive transmission lines over a heavily populated area in Oakland. I mean, neither one of these options are particularly good. And as I said, today we can do it differently. We can do it differently by using a combination of grid upgrades, energy storage, and energy efficiency. We call it the Oakland Clean Energy Initiative. And it would be the first time that we're using a grid solution involving local distributed energy resources to replace a fossil fuel power plant in order to improve transmission reliability for the community. It's a great example of what I mean by integrating different technologies to optimize the benefits and come up with a more sustainable approach, a more cost-effective approach. It's also an example of how the grid can provide access to clean energy for everyone, not just someone who can afford to put a solar rooftop unit on their home. It's a key concept. The clean energy future has to be accessible and affordable for all. Everyone must be able to benefit from it. If we create an energy economy of haves and have-nots, it won't work. It won't work. It's not sustainable. It's not fair, and it's certainly not the right thing to do. This is something I'm truly passionate about. As someone who is responsible for keeping the lights on for 16 million people, I can tell you, whether you live in Palo Alto or Fresno, up in the Sierras, whether you're high income or low income, by the way, 40% of our customers are on some kind of low-income program. Having sustainable, affordable energy must be available to all. That's something that has to happen in order for us to be successful. As a matter of fact, I've come to adopt an expression which says, if it's not sustainable unless it's affordable and unless it's available to all. I truly believe that. The grid helps achieve these imperatives. It connects everyone cleanly and affordably. But the most single important area where I think the grid has the potential to transform things for us here in the power sector is not even a power sector issue. It's transportation. Because of the progress we've made on renewables in California, we have a supply of incredibly clean energy that's available to fuel electric vehicles. In fact, there are times now when we have more surplus renewable energy available than we actually need. We need to leverage that to tackle emissions from the transportation sector because it makes up the biggest share of greenhouse gases in California at about 40% of the total. Simply put, California can't achieve its greenhouse gas emission targets if we don't address the transportation sector head on. I'll also note that clean transportation gives us the ability to address air quality at a local level, which is also very important. Air quality continues to be a major problem in parts of our state. So from a sustainability perspective, it's a double win. I mentioned earlier that the state wants to put 5 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. But a major threat to that goal is the lack of publicly available charging sites, right? 40% of the people in California live in apartments or townhomes, condos, or other places where access to a dedicated parking spot where they could plug in an EV simply doesn't exist. That percentage is even higher in urban areas where EVs would otherwise make a great deal of sense for buyers. These residents need chargers in their buildings, at their workplaces, or other public spaces in order to make owning an EV a true reality for them. What we hear from customers is that they're worried about something called range anxiety. You guys know what that is? Yeah, it's the fear of running out of juice. They really are. They're worried about it, and range anxiety continues to be a barrier to greater EV ownership. Today, we have about 12,000 publicly available charging ports in the state. We estimate that in the next 10 years or so, we're going to need 250,000 just in Northern and Central California alone. The grid will be essential to that kind of scale, and we're already working on that effort. We have the largest program of any utility in the country to build charging stations. As a matter of fact, right now we are approved and are building 7,500 electric vehicle charging stations throughout our service territory. Construction started this year, and we've gone live with, I think, our first 10 or 12 in Merced. But ultimately, 7,500 is a start, but we're going to need a lot more. And we see that as an absolutely vital role that we can play to really encourage greater adoption of electric vehicles. And again, the modern grid will play an important role in that. As we think about how to accelerate this work of modernizing the grid, however, there is a policy challenge. If we're going to ensure continued investment in the physical infrastructure, we also need the policy infrastructure to support that investment. The day we've done it for the past 100 years, the way we've done it for the past 100 years, simply isn't going to work for the next 100 years. Technology is changing the dynamics in the energy space so fast that our regulatory policies, frankly, aren't keeping up with the realities in the market. It used to be that companies like PG&E basically built and owned all of the infrastructure on the grid, and we've recovered the investment over 30 years by charging customers on a volumetric basis based on how much energy they were actually consuming. But now, there are multiple parties owning and operating assets on the grid. Solar panels, batteries are the most obvious examples, but today, they're taking energy. Some of our customers are taking sometimes power from their solar panels. Other times, they're taking it from the grid. And other times, they're using the grid to sell their excess power back to the grid. It's a completely different model. And ironically, it's a model where the grid is even more important than ever, probably more valuable than ever. And yet, because of the regulatory policy, it hasn't quite caught up with the new reality. And so some of the parties who are getting the most value from the grid are paying the least to use it, shifting their costs to customers that frankly can't afford to have solar. So it's a real problem, and we got to fix it. The disconnect left unresolved will undermine the progress, and we've got to fix it. We believe we need a new model. It might be that customers pay a fair share for the value of the grid services they use. It might be a more incentive-based or performance-based revenue model for companies like PG&E. We don't know. We know that it has to be different, though. It's a challenge that needs to be worked out by the regulators and energy providers and customers and the various organizations that have a stake. But the point is, as we integrate more and more distributed resources like batteries and rooftop solar, as we add more and more electric vehicles and other technologies, our customers move from just being consumers of energy to also being producers and sellers of energy. The value of the grid is changing, and the way that we pay to maintain and operate it has to change as well. We don't have the answers, but we know that change is coming, and we're really looking forward to engaging in that. Now, this isn't just a risk to companies like PG&E. It's really a risk to our climate progress in the state, because if we don't have a sustainable model for funding the grid, which I believe is so fundamental to our progress, we risk allowing it to fall behind like we've seen with other core infrastructure in the country. So it's important. We got to get that policy issue right. I also can't leave tonight without briefly touching on another risk, and one that might seem narrow, but that I think could have sweeping implications. I'm talking about how California deals with the rising threat of wildfires. As you know, and maybe some of you in this room have been affected personally, we had the most destructive fires in California's history last year. The causes have yet to be determined, but by all accounts, climate extremes played a major role in these disasters. It was like a confluence of really bad events. So we had extraordinary winds, extremely dry conditions, trees weakened by years of drought, plus an incredible amount of fuel that was created by the record rains in the beginning of the year, and then by the record heat in the second part of the year. And virtually all the experts tell us that we're going to experience more of these conditions in the future. We need to think broadly about this as a society and ask ourselves, how are we going to deal with it? What are the implications for our progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions? I'll tell you, in just 1 week, emissions from the Northern California wildfires resulted in the equivalent of 1 year, 1 full year of emissions coming from the transportation sector. It's huge. What are the implications for our customers and communities in terms of their ability to get insurance? What will it mean for land use, building codes? What do we need to do differently in terms of forest management? What about wildfire? What about suppression strategies, fire suppression strategies? We also need to make our infrastructure, utility infrastructure, more resilient and make our communities more resilient as we move forward. What will it mean in terms of how we operate the grid? Will we de-energize the grid during moments of really extreme wind? These issues are all right here at the forefront. We need to look at them holistically, and we need a collaborative approach involving policymakers, communities, and the industries that are affected. And there's an urgency to this. Wildfire season is around the corner, and risk maps show that nearly half of California is now vulnerable to future wildfires. Half. Now, you might be wondering, though, what does all of this have to do with our ability to meet our climate goals? And the answer is potentially a lot. And that's because of another weird thing. We have this strange California law currently. It's known as inverse condemnation. And if a power line comes down as a result of a tree falling due to extreme winds or some other cause, and that power line ignites a fire, the energy company could have unlimited financial liability for the property damage, even if it did everything it was supposed to in terms of maintenance and safety regulations. And that's why many investors right now are saying that the magnitude of the fire risk in the near and long term here in California makes energy companies in California relatively uninvestable, considering the tremendous risk that we have and the many thousands of opportunities that they have for their investments elsewhere. It's a big deal. Now, it doesn't take a financial expert to see that this isn't a sustainable policy. It effectively makes the power companies the default insurers for wildfire risk. The issue is very much on the radar of the capital markets and the credit rating agencies. We've gotten downgraded by S&P and Moody's. And they're openly questioning whether it makes California's energy companies too much of a risk to invest in. It's a big deal. It's a problem as we think about the need to raise tens of billions of dollars in capital to fund additional climate and clean energy initiatives in the coming years. We need to think this through as a state and as part of a comprehensive plan, a comprehensive response to the wildfire issues that are now before us. I want to finish tonight by shifting gears. As part of my invitation to speak here today, I was asked to talk a little bit about my personal story and my personal perspective on the issue of climate change. So I'll share a quick story. I mentioned earlier that I came to the United States from Cuba when I was 5. We left Cuba with not much more than the clothes on our backs, like most immigrants. You know, it was a scary time, but I had my parents. My parents truly believed that this was a place, that the United States represented a place where we could really have a much better life, and that certainly was the case. After landing in freezing Minnesota, after a few months, we settled in New Jersey, which was balmy compared to Minnesota. My parents, you know, typical immigrants, they worked day and night. My dad had multiple jobs. My mom did piecework at home, where she got paid for every piece of work she actually finished at home. And, you know, they were somehow able to save enough money to buy a tiny little grocery store in the neighborhood, where, frankly, I would work after school when I was a kid. Over time, they flipped the store and they bought a little bigger one. They made a little profit. They bought a bigger one, and this went on for a while. And I tell you, they did a great job, and I'm so very proud of them. So I grew up believing in hard work and the idea that anything was possible if you had the courage and the perseverance to pursue it and to really go for it. To me, that meant going to college and getting a job, a good job with a good company. Those were my aspirations. I'm the first in my family to get a college education. So I did. I went to the University of Miami. I got a degree in engineering, and after school, after college, I went to work at the local power company, Florida Power and Light Company. To be honest, the idea of becoming a CEO never once crossed my mind, not even close. But early in my career at FPL, I had the best mentor you could ever hope for. He asked me one day, he said, "Geisha, what do you want to do long term?" They always ask that, right? What are your long-term career aspirations? And I said something like, wanting to be a supervisor or a manager. And he said to me, he says, "No, Geisha, in the long term. What do you want to do in the long term?" Well, I was talking long term, but I think I must have had a really puzzled look on my face. And he said something that stopped me in my tracks. He said, "Geisha, someone has to run this company someday. Why not you?" I think we can all remember certain pivotal moments in our lives or our careers that rocked our world. That was mine. Why not you? Why not me? For starters, women didn't run big companies back then. Certainly, Latin women, immigrants, come on, that didn't happen. But that one simple question really stayed with me, and it opened my eyes, and I think it gave me a permission to think bigger and to imagine a different kind of future for myself. And for me, why not you has become something of a mantra that I've carried with me, and I continue to carry with me to this day. Now, why am I telling this story? I'm sharing it because it's the way I think about California and PG&E and the challenge of our lifetime, which is climate change. This is an absolute global issue. We can't solve it by ourselves, but someone has to be willing to step up and lead. And the challenge I've given to our employees is, why not us? Why not California? Why not PG&E? Just like leading the charge on acknowledging the threat of climate change, we're a company that was built to do big things. We're also a company that was designed to really serve the public interest. It's part of our DNA. Companies like PG&E have a broad role that extends far beyond delivering energy, more renewable energy. We can help with resilience and adaptation. We can help with clean transportation. We can help with public awareness and education. We reach into every home and business, and we have relationships with millions of customers. That represents an opportunity that frankly, we have to leverage. And so last year at PG&E, we developed a new vision for the company. It states, with a sustainable energy future as our North Star, we will meet the challenge of climate change while providing affordable energy for all customers. And this vision is now the driving force behind our plans and our strategy. And Terry, I think Dr. Schneider would be pleased. So now I pose this question to you. Why not you? Why not you? I'm looking right now at this audience full of people that no doubt includes future leaders in government, in our communities, future business leaders and entrepreneurs, scientists and innovators, advocates and environmental leaders. All of you are going to have opportunities to be a part of the solution on this critical issue. A challenge that probably more than any other is going to be the defining issue of our lifetimes. There may be big opportunities or there may be small ones. But when those opportunities come along, my hope is that you'll hear that question ringing in your ears. Why not you? Step up to the plate. Take it on. Let it be more than a rhetorical question. Let it be a challenge to yourself. Let it be a call to action. Let it be an inspiration to make a difference. Thank you so much for having me again tonight. I look forward to your questions.
All right, so we just want to take a final moment to thank all of the amazing co-sponsors who have made this event possible, particularly the Woods Institute. And of course, thank you to Dr. Terry Root, who has served as the driving force for the Schneider Lecture for over half a decade. Ms. Williams has proven that businesses can simultaneously thrive and work towards a sustainable future. She serves as a wonderful example and to show us all that how a leader can use their position to make a difference in their sphere of influence. With the current state of our nation and our world, it's important that everyone from academics to business, from grassroots organizations to politicians, work together towards solutions to this climate crisis. We at Students for Sustainable Stanford also ask, why not us? We work daily to create more equitable and environmentally friendly future and through sustainable education, energy reduction programs, and pushing Stanford towards carbon neutrality. As Stephen Schneider taught us, everyone can and should try to contribute to make the world a better place for us and future generations. We encourage each of you to use your voice and your power to promote sustainability on campus and in your community. To get involved, please reach out to Students for Sustainable Stanford. Thank you again for joining us for the 6th Annual Stephen H. Schneider Memorial Lecture. And have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you.